your failure or what you define as a failure might actually look like success to someone else. So many times in my life, I came to realize, that failure and success, I almost see them like as a Venn diagram, like interlocking circles, because it's really not one or the other. Sometimes it's kind of a curvy road that leads you to success, and failure is truly just a part of it. More often than not, it's not you, it's not that you're not good enough, but it's simply not the right fit for you. Hello everyone and welcome back to my new episode. So happy you're diving in today. I'm back with another solo episode, and today's topic is a bit of a different one because today is all about failing. And you might think like, wow, that's a bit weird, especially if you listened before to any episodes that I previously released, because oftentimes I focus on, success stories and people achieving something really cool, having, the courage to do something. And usually these stories are all about how they succeeded. But today is about the art of failing, because I truly came to realize in my 30 years on this earth that failure is such an important part of life, a important part also of success at the end of the day. So today I'll be sharing 3 of my very personal failures in life. Some of them are also kind of like failures, because you will see that, some of them were really blessings in disguise. And that's also one of the learnings I want to talk about later. But yeah, basically starting from the top, I did a little bit of digging and kind of went back to the dictionary and looked up what is actually the definition of failure. Basically in the dictionary, it said that failure equals the lack of success. And I found that to be quite problematic, to be frank, in the English language, because, that's also what is taught to us, right? From very early in school, that if you fail, it means that you're not succeeding. And I just truly think that that is not right. So many times in my life, I came to realize, that failure and success, I almost see them like as a Venn diagram, like interlocking circles, because it's really not one or the other. Sometimes it's kind of a curvy road that leads you to success, and failure is truly just a part of it. But, why is it that we are so scared of failing? And I came across another study done recently, I think by the University College in London, and they discovered something super interesting, and that was that the majority of people that they surveyed, when kind of asking questions about, are they afraid of failure and what are kind of their anxiety levels, the majority of people was more afraid about that uncertainty about will I fail or will I succeed, versus actually about the consequences of like what will happen when I fail. And I find that to be so wild, right? Because I am literally like, that was me. As a child, I remember like back in school, I was so scared of failure itself. And I wasn't even scared of, right, like, oh, if I get a quiz wrong or whatever, I'll get a bad grade. Like, I wasn't so scared about the consequences, but truly I was terrified. Like, I can remember, little Anastasia being like 6, 7, 8 years old in school. I was just so terrified of like not, being the perfect little girl I think I mostly expected myself to be. And I remember like, going up to the teachers, and before even, giving my quiz, I was like, well, can you check, is this really right? And I mean, yes, I was a complete nerd, but I just was truly, truly terrified of failure. And I think so many people out there feel the same, and I think there is something to be said, in our society, that success is always the thing that is celebrated, right? Like when I go on YouTube, there's a gazillion and one videos about how to succeed in A or how to succeed in B. And, when you look on Instagram or LinkedIn, like it's full of success stories, which is great. Like it can be inspiring. But I think we are kind of leaving a really important part of the conversation out. And those are exactly those stories of failure. So today, as I said, I want to share 3 really personal stories of failure with you, and also share, what I learned from it. Because I think truly only when we get comfortable with talking about failure, are we even able to, to have the courage to take that first step or to start something new that I always talk about. So the first failure, my first failure story, really takes me back to school. And as I mentioned in my intro story, I was quite the nerd in school. I was a very good student, always kind of doing my stuff, and had always really good grades, and that was really important to me. But, there came a time, I think when I was about 16, I did a year abroad in the UK, and I came back to Germany to finish my schooling there. And the goal was to, just continue seamlessly, graduate in exactly the timeline that I had, planned for myself with my friends. But I was 16, right? Like I was a teenager, priorities were all over the place. So I started getting really, really bad grades. So like from a previous A student, I went to having like C's and D's and sometimes even worse. So when it came to the end of that school year, I actually made the decision to repeat a year in school. And while that might not sound like quite as dramatic as it truly felt back then, I mean, I think you can imagine that it was quite, or it felt like quite a humongous failure because for someone, who already back then had everything like so planned out and knew exactly, right, like I'll be in school for 12 years, that's kind of the standard in Germany, and then go to university and then do this and then do this, and by age 25, or 24, I'll be done with bachelor and master's. Like I had it all figured out. And then like all of a sudden at age 16 or 17, I had to then say, actually, no, like I am failing. I'm not able to follow that plan. I have to really take accountability for my actions. And there was the not studying and having wrong priorities. Or I mean, even not wrong priorities, just being a teenager and, not doing so much school stuff. But yeah, really taking those consequences of my actions. And I remember like I was really scared to tell, especially my father back then, that I made that decision to repeat a year because I thought in his eyes he will, think, and I come from a very academically focused family that is kind of all about achievement. So I really thought, he'll be so disappointed in me. But actually, he said, that he was really proud of me and that he really admired my kind of taking that action. And my mom was also incredibly supportive. So yeah, that was also like a really big lesson and learning for me that the people, around you, your family, your network, your friends will be on your side no matter what. And my biggest takeaway, my biggest learning from that first failure of repeating a year from school was really that these type of failures, especially in these early years, in these teenage years, that is exactly what teaches us stamina and what teaches us resilience. And I see that over and over, especially in young kids and especially those who, might be really blessed by getting really lucky and, kind of everything comes super easy to them. And that's great. But especially, when these kids grow up or even, get a bit older, and then, inevitably you will always be faced with some kind of, bump in the road. Life will always throw you some kind of curveball. Oftentimes, when you didn't encounter those moments of failure in, kind of your early childhood or teenage years, people are lost, right? And they kind of don't know what to do. They don't know how to stand back up, and they don't know, right, like how to get back on their feet and kind of, show that resilience and stamina. So I almost, when I speak also to my brothers who are quite a bit younger, or when I see other people who have having kids, and I almost always say like that's awesome, right? Like if your kid is failing, or if you are a teenager and you're failing, I think that's great because that means you're trying something new, and that means you're courageous, and at the end of the day that also means that you're learning a ton. And I think I saw it somewhere on Instagram recently where someone was sharing that in their family, actually their parents every day at the dinner made them share stories of failure every day. So they would say like, hey, what did you fail at school today? And I thought that is amazing. Like, I absolutely love that, to actually, teach kids not so much about like, oh, tell me about all these successes, tell me about all the A's you got, but actually, no, tell me what you failed at today. So I thought that was really, really awesome. And especially in those early years, I think failure is so important. And I mean, it doesn't have to be something like monumental, like repeating a year in school. Like, so many people also do like some kind of sport, right, in school. And my husband did swimming and I did competitive dancing, and we talked about it recently that, we are so grateful that we grew up doing these things and doing competitions and really encountering like failure and success so often, because those days, where you came in second or where you literally came in last, and the next day you have to show up and go to practice, like that truly is what forms character. That is what forms stamina and resilience. So I think that is also something really important to keep in mind, to just really, really embrace those moments as well. So yes, that was my first encounter, I guess, with a big failure. And apart from that big learning about stamina and resilience, honestly, also ended up being like the best blessing in disguise. I met my very best friend in that new school that I changed to when I then decided to repeat a year. I got into my dream university, and, so it really, I think my life would have turned out really differently if I wouldn't have made that decision. So oftentimes, you also find these things as so often blessing in disguises. And then coming to my second one, and that's career related. I try to pick different spheres, so there's hopefully some story for everyone. But yeah, my career related failure, and I think there are quite a few people that hopefully and probably can relate to this, especially in today's crazy market. And that was after I graduated with my master's degree, which I did in the US. I wanted, and I was an international student, I'm from Germany originally. And I wanted to, as so many, stay in the US, get a bit of work experience. And as an international student, you get like a certain work authorization with your visa. Sometimes it's 1 year, sometimes it's 3 years. It's really depending on what you studied. So I had a work authorization of 1 year. And I thought, great, like that will hopefully be easy to get a job. I was super naive also to think that, but I graduated, with good grades from a good university. So I truly thought that's not going to be as hard. But let me tell you, it was extremely challenging. And it was such a difficult time because I feel like post-graduation is anyways so tricky. And I had this great episode with Tamina. If you haven't listened to it, I'll link it down here. But there we also talk about post-graduation depression and kind of that time when you, after, being in school or life and other people telling you what to do, and when you graduate and you find yourself kind of like in a state of, now what, right? Like, what do I do? And in addition to that, right, like I try to go back and count all the applications I sent out, but honestly, it's like simply impossible because they were probably hundreds, right, of applications I sent out. There were so many, probably 50, 60 interviews in total that I attended at so many different companies. And it was just such a overwhelmingly frustrating process. And of course, like some of this was because of things that were completely out of my control, right? Like with the visa issue, some companies would just be like, well, we don't sponsor visas because, no one wants to hire you just for a year. Of course, they think further. And after a year, I would have required work authorization. But of course, that's also really tricky, right? To be in that position where people, just tell you, well, no, just because of your nationality, we can't hire you. Like that's also incredibly, incredibly frustrating. But sometimes it was also when companies who said like, oh no, we would actually sponsor your visa, but you still didn't end up getting the job, right? And I remember that one company, I had literally like 4 or 5 rounds there, in-person rounds. Like that was also before COVID. And then after 5 rounds, I just received like an automated email saying, no, thank you for your time, but no. And I remember that so well. Like that was such a kick in the gut, right? Like, and I had experiences like that so many times. I remember like this particular one because, I knew they would sponsor my visa, so it wouldn't have been that wouldn't have been an issue. And, it kind of all felt like things were falling into place. But, that was also such a important learning because I remember that company, like when I think about it now, I'm so glad I didn't end up working there. It was like this really sketchy consulting company. And I remember like in the interview process, which was also so weird, like one of their also really high up people asked me super weird interview questions. And I remember one of them was like, imagine you're standing in a supermarket and they're like 30 people in front of you at the checkout, but you just have to get out in the next 5 minutes. What would you do? And I don't know, I was saying things like, ask kindly if I can maybe, kind of cut the line or, talk to the people. And he was like, no, that's not the answer I'm looking for. I'm looking for an answer for something like you should be screaming, there's a bomb. So everyone runs out and you can just get what you want. And that was such a and he asked me so many questions like that. And I remember thinking about it now, the fact that I was upset to not be working in a place like this is ridiculous, right? Because I don't want to work in a place that, wants people like that is, interested in developing people to think like that, right? And to not be kind and to invent crazy stories just to get what you want. So truly the biggest learning here in that second story of, applying and not getting the job and taking forever to find a job, is really that so often you don't get a job or something doesn't work out, not because you're not good enough, but simply because it's not the right fit for you. And that is such an important thing to understand in life, right? And I truly believe that there is always a bit of like the universe has its hand in things. And there is such a thing as, right, like good timing and not good timing. And things do sometimes work out for a reason or don't work out for a reason. So I think for me, that whole process took a lot of time. I remember I had to, take even a volunteer position because you basically only get like 3 months until you would have to like leave the country on that visa. So I remember after 3 months, I first took a volunteer position. Then I did end up getting a job a month later, which was also not my dream job. But at least, I got something. And then a whole probably 12 months after I started applying, I actually found, the kind of job I was looking for. So it took me a year, right? And that is such a long time. And yes, I kind of, already got myself out there and I was already doing things, but still it was super, super hard. And it was super hard seeing kind of your friends left and right, already having jobs, or even other international students already finding jobs. And I remember meeting with friends or with my partner's friends at that time, and they already all had like these established careers, and they would already be asking like, what's new with you? And I'd be like, well, I'm still applying. And I remember one time one of them said like, oh, still? And I know that didn't come from a bad place, but that's truly how it felt like, right? Like being stuck in a place and there's just so little you can do about it. But really that biggest learning that often or more often than not, it's not you. It's not that you're not good enough, but it's simply not the right fit for you. And for that little learning, I actually want to share my favorite metaphor with you, and that is my penguin metaphor. And those who know me know also that this is exactly the reason why penguins are my spirit animals. That's a little metaphor I think I first heard when I was doing my bachelor's, and I just completely fell in love with it. And I think it fits so perfect in this learning that I just shared. And that is that when you look at the penguin, right? The penguin is a bird, and you would think like, if the penguin compares itself to other birds, it would think, oh my God, I'm so bad. Like they can all fly, and I literally cannot. Like I must be the worst bird there is in this world. Like I totally suck. I'm a total failure. But when you actually put the penguin in water, it is one of the fastest swimmers in the entire animal kingdom. So I think that is just such a strong message that truly so often it's not your skills, it's not you, it's the environment you're in, right? It's the specific skill that you have, that specific talent that you have that will help you to excel. And there is no point at all to compare yourself to others. So that's my little penguin metaphor I wanted to leave you with. And then my third failure, and I mean, that is also a failure. I want to preface, right? It's a bit of a tricky one, and I would never, say to anyone else like, oh, that's a failure. But that's how it feels for me. And that's my current situation, my fertility journey. And if you haven't listened to my latest episode on my IVF journey, then I also link it down here. Give it a listen, especially if it's something, fertility related that interests you, or if you're going through something similar, but having fertility issues and, having been trying now for over a year and having to go through IVF, it's really, really easy to feel like a failure. People always tell you like, it's not you. And honestly, in my heart, I know it myself, right? That it's like, it's not something that I did consciously, or it's not like really a true failure because it's not something that I can like control. But I think as a human, or, in human nature, it's of course, it makes sense that, you will start feeling like you're failing at something, right? Like you will start feeling like, oh my God, like I'm literally seem to not be able, or having issues with doing like what seems like the most natural thing in the world, right? Of conceiving a child, of carrying a child. So that's probably the trickiest failure I had to deal with in life so far. But also, I think as I said, like everything comes for a certain reason. And I think this failure also really came into my life for so many reasons, or not even this failure, let's call it this challenge. But the biggest learning that I took from this to date, and I'll tell you when I'm hopefully, and I don't say if, I'll say when I'm on the other side, I'll tell you everything that I've learned. But for this episode, I think the biggest learning is truly that your failure, or what you define as a failure, might actually look like success to someone else, to someone from the other side. And let me explain. What I basically mean by that is that, I could be sitting here saying like, oh my God, I'm such a failure because I'm not able to get pregnant. And then, I might be, and we recently just went on vacation, my husband and I, and there were so many, couples with kids. And of course, right, like these thoughts creep up in your head and you think like, wow, I'm so jealous. Like they really have what I want. And ultimately you start feel like you're failing. But then more often than not, maybe these people are actually looking at you and they're like, oh, wow, good for her, right? She kind of prioritized her career and she doesn't have kids yet. And she can, lie there and enjoy the time with her husband. Or, other example, like recently we went to a party, and again there were a few couples and some already had kids, and again so easy to fall in that category of like, ooh, wow, you're comparing yourself, you feel like you're falling behind. But then it made me realize other people might be looking at me and my husband and thinking, oh my God, like how good for them, they found each other, and they kind of quite early in their life, in their 20s, they found their person. And maybe this person might have not found their partner yet, or might be single or unhappy with that. So I think there's always something to be said about that, the position you are in, even if it feels completely horrible to you and completely sad, but there's still something to be grateful for. And I talked also a lot about gratefulness in my last episode, but I just truly, feel like there's always something to appreciate, because others looking, outside at your situation might be, jealous, or might be feeling themselves like a failure exactly because of the thing you already have. And then a third person, might be looking at that second person. So I think in life, there's always like this chain of events, and there's always like kind of this chain of energy. So again, that goes kind of with also what I said in the second one, like this comparing doesn't help, because everyone is on their own journey. Everyone is in their, kind of unique place. So being grateful for what you have, is truly, I think, the biggest learning. And to truly remember, right, like to appreciate what you have, because as I said, like what you think, like, you're in a position of failing might truly look like goals, or might truly look like something really great to someone out there. And while we're on this topic of IVF and fertility issues, after my last episode, and thank you so much for all the nice messages that I received, that was really, really kind. But one of the messages I received, I loved so much, because basically that person shared with me that one of their friends is also going through it, and they actually, celebrate every single failure along the IVF journey. And even, for someone who doesn't know the, how IVF works and everything, there's so many steps. So you will encounter a failure one way or another. And I thought that was so cool, because she was like, a failed cycle, we go on vacation, or, like less eggs retrieved than we wanted to, go have a cool dinner. So I think that's just such a nice way to truly, take life as it comes, and to focus, not so much on only, celebrating the good stuff, but also really, really embracing the, the bad stuff, or the stuff that just is part of it. So I want to leave it at that. Those are the 3 stories I wanted to share. And maybe the bonus tip that kind of also always helps me is to also understand, failure sometimes also really just keeps life interesting, right? Because I am someone who, when reading a book, always likes to jump to the last page. I just want to know how it ends. Or, I love rewatching a movie that I like a gazillion times. But, that's not how life is, and we cannot jump to the last page. And I think maybe that's something that is really good, to take every curveball, to take every challenge like something to be grateful for, to not spend too much time thinking about why did one thing work out or why did the other not work out, and just also really trust, kind of our intuition, our gut feeling, and to not just focus so much on the bad stuff. So I hope there were a few learnings that you could take from this. I would also absolutely love if you share your failures with me. Put it in the comments what your biggest failures were, because life is so short. So let's also start celebrating the stuff that does not go to plan. If you like the episode, I would of course really appreciate it if you leave a like and a comment, and of course also subscribe if you are on YouTube. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.